Hello, good morning or good evening, depending on where you're watching us. My name is Jose Carlos Gutierrez. I'm part of MAI's board of directors. We equip and encourage Christian publishers and writers in hard places of the world to create excellent content that enriches the church and influences society. Welcome to today's session on how to create life-transforming comics. Let me introduce you, Favian Ee, who's going to be here with us. He is from Singapore, and he's not your typical artist writer. He's both author and illustrator, and he cares deeply about communication and good theology. He has a bachelor's degree in computer engineering and has also graduated from animation school and worked in the film industry in visual effects. He is currently an educator teaching art and media at the Polytechnic University. He's author and artist of John Wesley, The World My Parish. It's a 100-page graphic novel of the life of John Wesley and the arrival of Methodism in Singapore. And it was commissioned by the Methodist Church in Singapore and printed by Graceworks. It's an excellent work. We're going to talk about it later. And well, he used to work also in visual effects for 7 years at Hollywood blockbusters that you may have seen, such as Interstellar and Iron Man 2, and has been teaching art and media for 7 years. He's passionate about the Bible and good communication through words and images. So thank you for being here, Favian. And I'm glad to be here because I've known Favian since 2018 in Singapore. So we're friends, and so this is going to be like a talk and discussion with friends. So thank you all for being here. So now that we talk about your graphic novel, Favian, would you like to tell us more about it? Like, how was the production of it?
All right. Maybe I can give a bit of show a bit of pictures, info pages, right? If I'll share my screen. Give me a moment. Okay, where is it? Okay. Okay, so these are some sample pages from the graphic novel. It was done digitally, except for the cover pages, which I did in watercolor, right? And it took about 2 years, almost 2 years to complete, from research to writing to illustration and revisions, editing and everything, right? And printing. Okay, so it's about the life of John Wesley, the founder of Methodism. And because it is commissioned by the Methodist Church in Singapore, so it's also how Methodism arrived into Singapore, right? So snippets of his life, like the fire that he was rescued from, his family background. You will notice I tried to give it a very authentic feel by presenting the clothing, the furnishing, the environments in this period. And this involved a lot of visual research, meaning looking for either photographs or paintings from that period. These interiors of the house are taken from virtual tours that are found online. So, parts of the house, they had a dog, a mastiff. So these clothing's all included in the research. His travels to America, and meeting the storms, his conversion experience, or some would say spiritual awakening experience, known as the Elders Gate experience because it happened at Elders Gate Street, right? Also the use of color and light to indicate different parts of the story, the feel of it. This is the only 2-page spread in the story where he preaches his first outdoor sermon. And arrival in Singapore, and the first few churches and schools in Singapore, right? So this is just a little snapshot of the graphic novel. And Jose Carlos was one of our reviewers and very kindly wrote one of the endorsements.
Yes, congratulations on this work. I have a copy of it myself, and I saw many of the things that you said, and you know, the coloring, the shading, and something that I appreciate a lot. It's the artwork reference and the bibliography that you used at the end. So you used a lot of research, and also the buildings at the end, Methodist churches there. So what was the most challenging task of all this project for you?
So I live in Singapore. I've been to England, but I don't live in England, and I'm not familiar with the aesthetic, you know, the architecture and how things look, except from what I saw on movies and, you know, paintings. So the visual research is probably the most challenging part of it, to represent something in that period, in that country, you know, convincingly. And in terms of the biographical research, there are quite a few biographies. Wesley is very well documented, so it's just having to read a lot and trying to pick the relevant portions, and also to filter out the misinformation because there are some things which are misreported. But I think the visual research is, you know, is back then there wasn't photography, so it depends on what kind of paintings you can find, if people actually represented things in that form, you know. So that's you know, when you are a comic artist, when you're reading a book, your mind just fills in the blanks. But when you're a comic artist, you have to actually represent and recreate everything visually yourself, everything. Yeah, transport. You know, I have sketches of English saddles, ships. What kind of ships at different period, what kind of fashion at different period, you know, yeah, what did they wear, what did they eat, what did they, you know, how did they live, all these kind of things, furniture and those things too.
Yeah, that's such a great task. I've done that myself when doing illustrations from different time periods, that you have to do a lot of research, and especially visually. Sometimes you have to be specific on details that you don't usually pay attention to because you're going to be reproducing it. So thank you for everybody joining us. I see comments from people from Hungary, from Singapore, from Kenya. And we have one question from Ezekias about what is the target age group for this comic, Aiden?
Okay, so I wasn't really given, I mean, the target age group is pretty broad. It's not specifically for children. So the Methodist Church wanted to produce something to for the Methodist people here to understand a bit more of the history in a easier to swallow way, because a lot of times the material that is available is very text heavy, and you know, it gets boring after a while, hard to read. And they realized that I can draw and I do comics, so they asked me to do this. And I think definitely there's an intention to appeal to children, but not just to children, but also to, you know, teenagers or young adults. But the kind of stuff that I do is not really necessarily children's material, so I tend to go quite deep. So I just did what I felt would appeal to a wider audience. And interestingly, after it was released, quite a few older folks, you know, people in the 50s, 60s or older were buying it. And they're also buying it for Christmas and to give it away. But even my friends' children, so, you know, 10 plus or below 10, and they were hogging the book. You know, they might not understand all the nuances or catch all the Easter eggs in there, but they were reading it in one shot. So everywhere from primary school children to adults and a bit more senior adults, they were also quite they enjoyed the book, and quite a few of them told me they just read it at one sitting. So that one I have to thank God for that.
Yes, I read it, and I think it's really easy to follow it and appealing to the different ages, because you use in some pages more text following the story, and in some other pages, as the ones you show from the storm, you have one page of illustration. So that has the right balance that can appeal different people from different ages. And yourself being an educator, I think you did a great work in presenting this, teaching people about John Wesley. So Ezekiel said he's from Rwanda, and please write your questions in the comment section or in the Q&A section, and we can answer it along the session. So Fabian, tell us, how do you discover that you have this gift of drawing images, and the steps you did to develop and harness this gift?
Okay. I guess a lot of things you discover when you're young and you have a lot of time to explore things. Kids like to draw, right? But not all the kids will pursue that. Some want to go into sports, and someone to go into dance or whatever, music. I also always like drawing, but I think it's only later in my adult life that I realized that I like drawing stories. So it's not just drawing, it's storytelling using visuals. And since young, when I was, my early influences would be things like Garfield, back then when it was better, and Calvin and Hobbes or Asterix, and I enjoy reading stories in pictorial form. And later on, when I was in primary school, I also discovered that I like to write stories. With some friends, we just created our own characters and we started writing things. And I would draw the character, and then we would use the characters in the stories and all these things. So early in school or even preschool, I found that I had the interest, and I think that's the first thing to note. It is, if you don't have the interest, you will not pursue it, right? So that's the motivation. The interest will help you to pursue and be a better artist and a better storyteller. And of course, encouragement from parents and teachers and friends as well.
Yes, that's really important, to be encouraged. Some people ask me, how did I start drawing? And since I remember, I've been drawing, but also doing it constantly, and getting books on how to do it. And that helps a lot. And that's why I also tell some of my students to keep doing it and keep getting better. And to parents, that one way to encourage kids that like to draw, it's providing art supplies and everything that they can have around to draw. So you told us about the comics that you like, and you have a very great gift to doing something that is really difficult, and that is drawing perspective. And you're an urban sketcher as well. So how did you develop this? How did you become interested in drawing perspectives?
I mean, draftsmanship is draftsmanship. If you want to learn to draw well, it's okay. Just want to clarify, it's not talent, all right? It's skill. Skills can be learned, and perspective is a technical skill. And I teach these kind of things. So maybe let me just pull out the sketchbook of mine, which I use for my sketching. So recent one that I did was this area used to be old barracks, but now it's like restaurants. I've also done others like some railway bridges in Singapore. Yeah. So how do you learn perspective? Well, there are a lot of good material in books and in YouTube and websites where you can learn good perspective. But that's only one aspect of drawing. You know, there are quite a few aspects. So if you want to talk about drawing foundation, is proportion, perspective, tone, texture, composition. All right. Those are the few things that you just need to ground yourself well in. Yeah. Don't chase the style first. Right. Style is the last thing that should be on your mind. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. So we talk about skills, about talents. Well, so speaking about doing comics and graphic novels from a Christian perspective. So what do you think it makes what makes a Christian cartoonist?
Okay. What makes a Christian? Right. I think the Christian cartoonist, you know, in my mind, it's not a cartoonist that happens to be a Christian. You know, anybody can be a cartoonist if you want to work hard, right? But what is it that makes you a Christian? And what is it that you do in your cartoons or comics that makes it Christian? You know, is it just because it has a token Christian theme, or you know, mentions God or Jesus somewhere? You know, I mean, that's not what you guys as publishers, you know, look for in a Christian writer, right? So we might ask, what's a Christian writer? You know, not too different from a Christian cartoonist. It's only the medium that is different, right? What are you going to publish? You know, what do you find Christian material that's worth publishing? Might help to answer that particular question. Songwriters that are Christian, or Christian songwriters. You know, for me, the way I practice my discipline is the things that I produce. Ideally, I mean, not for non-commercial, especially unless this kind of commissions springs from out of who I am, you know, my own faith and my own devotions, my own interest, and I have quite a strong interest in biography, right, and theology and Bible. So if you have seen, okay, maybe I can show you another example of some other work I've done, right? Okay. So I have this on the web, and maybe I just pick one. Okay. I don't do this very often, but there's some, you know, these are some older works. Christian themed messages, right? You know, this particular one is about how science and art both involve intense observation and help us to appreciate God's creation, and the message that God brings to us through his creation. But in terms of longer form, a few years back, I did a series. I tried to draw the Gospel of John because I was studying the Gospel of John for a few years. So I did chapter 1, all right, in a comic form. Okay. And chapter 1 can be a bit abstract, so I had to use different devices to convey what the John was writing about. Right. I think it's not even chapter 1. It's chapter 1. So this is a prologue. Okay. So the prologue ends. No one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side. And then you have the page turn. He has made him known. Right. So that is where words alone and pictures alone may not convey the idea that John has, you know, that Christ is the one that makes God known, right? So they kind of line up, like what you might call line matching or something, right? And then it goes into, you know, John the Baptist. These are some of the thumbnails which I did. right? So this springs from my study of John, you know, and I think you can later go and have a look at it yourself, but it springs from a very deep study of the gospel itself. And how do I challenge myself to convey these ideas using this particular medium in a way which enriches the audience in a way that's clear, that the audience can understand, the reader can understand. And it's not just like children's illustrated book where I have some words and I illustrate the text, right? You know, because the way words and pictures interact in comics is very different. Yeah. So I think for Christian comic, firstly, you have, you know, be a Christian. What does it mean to be a Christian? And, you know, to what maturity you have is what you are able to convey to your reader, much as what the writer might do.
Great. So where can we find these images that you show? So our participants.
So, yeah, the Facebook page is called Wen's World, WEN_S World Christian Comics. All right. So there are some uploaded down there. It's quite old stuff. I haven't updated it in a while. I used to do this as a business. So I used to draw these characters on stationery with Bible verses and those kind of things, and notebooks and, you know, postcards and whatnots. And I used to sell it in some shops here. I mean, not a big business, but you know, it was quite interesting and way to use my gifts.
Thank you. And yeah, I like how you used all the visual language to tell a story, because that's what I tell my students, that visual storytelling it's more than just putting panels in pages. You have to keep a balance on when to use a big panel, when you have to use different panels, and how many of them to use in order not to have like the page packed with small drawings and a lot of text. So yeah, that's something really useful in visual storytelling. And we have a comment from Tim Gustafson. He says, to convey the idea of the invisible God being made visible in Jesus through a comic. That's wonderful. And yeah, I agree with that. And Janet Wilson, she says, I love this. Some kids just love to read cartoons rather than just words. We publish Christian fiction for kids. It is possible to convey the stories to cartoon format, a book of, say, 18 to 20,000 words. What do you think?
How many pages do you have? Well, okay, a couple of things. The first thing is to recognize that different media work differently. So if you've watched Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 1, and I think this year or next year is coming Part 2. It's said to be it's a book by Frank Herbert that is not easily translated to screen, and it's not because of the way it's written. All right. So it really depends on your material and whether you have someone skillful enough, or whether it's even possible to translate it into a visual medium. I mean, if you have something that's very abstract, I mean, if you're writing like one of those more didactic books, or if you're trying to translate a commentary into a visual medium or something, or John Piper or Tim Keller's books, that might be a bit more difficult. But things like these, like comics, probably better for narrative stuff, easier to do, but not to say that more abstract stuff can't be done. Okay, it can be done, but you have to be able to use different devices and be familiar with it. I have a book on philosophy, but it's communicated through comic style. Of course, historical fiction is a lot more straightforward. Yeah.
Yeah, some of the challenges that I face when converting a book into a comic is that part of the text is going to be translated into images, and part of it's going to be into the dialogue boxes. So not everything is going to be written. So that's why the script is really important. So in your experience writing, do you work with an editor, or especially in your latest graphic novel? How was your experience with the?
So the problem with what is here is we don't have really good comic editors. The thing is, okay, I'm quite experienced enough to be able to edit my own flow, but what Bernice and the Methodist Church stepped in was more for grammatical and typos kind of editing, proofreading. In terms of visual storytelling, they didn't step in. So that's why I actually asked to let you have a look at at the early stage before I committed it to drawing. So at least I have a second opinion. But comic editors are different from prose or poetry editors, all right? Because it's a very different medium. It's a visual medium, and whoever does the editing for that needs to be able to understand how the medium works. I mean, if you are like a video editor, right, you don't get a sound guy to come and edit it, right? Yeah. So same thing, right? Whoever is going to edit it needs to understand the medium first and understand what the artist creator is trying to do before he makes suggestions. Because I've had friends who work with other publishers who do not have a proper comic editor, and it was a quite painful experience for them because they're a lot more experienced than the person trying to edit their books.
Yes, thank you. So in this case, your graphic novel about John Wesley, even though it's from a Christian, an important Christian figure, he's also a historical character. So how do you think we can make Christian comics successful to both Christian and non-Christian young audiences?
All right, so in communication, there are a few things that you have to take note of, right? Of course, you have to know what your message is, right? You understand your medium enough to use the medium to convey your message, but you also need to know your audience, right? And if you try and hit too many audiences at the same time, you're not going to reach all of them. So in my case, my audience is quite clear. I'm doing this for the Methodist Church, right? I can tell the story in a way which non-Christians would be interested to read. In fact, one of the people who was involved in the publicity wasn't a Christian, but he had to read through in order to do some interview trivia questions, fast fire questions with me. So he had to read through the story, and he found it quite enjoyable to read. Maybe not something he might not normally pick up on his own, but it's part of his work. So at least he didn't find it boring and sleep halfway, right? Yeah. But I would say, if you know who your audience is, just focus on writing for that particular audience. Don't try and write for too diverse audience. You might just water down your story and not hit what you need to hit.
Yes, definitely. It's important to have a target audience, and then you can impact other audiences as well, or some other readers.
I think if you're not enough, it will appeal to a wider audience. But if it is going to appeal to too many, then it might not be good in the end. Then you might not even hit your main audience.
Yes, that's what I tell some of my students, that when creating a comics script, you have to think about starting to talk to one people in your mind. That's going to be your target reader, and then you can have in mind who are you talking to, and then you can develop the story and do the drawings and not get lost, as you say, in trying to talk to many people at the same time, because especially with images, sometimes different images are appealing to the style, different readers, depending on their age. So
actually have to make a lot of artistic decisions based on what you're trying to communicate to whom, even down to the size of the book, right? You know, I'm doing another graphic novel now, and we opted to use a different size, you know, because it's for more for school children. So if you don't know your audience, it's going to be hard for you to choose the appropriate medium and genre and format. Yeah.
Exactly. Can you explain more about the genre and the format?
Genre and format. Okay. So maybe I'll just pull out another graphic novel here. So when I was doing my graphic novel, the Methodist Church told me that another local Methodist church commissioned a Marvel artist to do a graphic novel of John Wesley for them. So it gave me quite a bit of a shock, because the guy is the Marvel artist and I'm not, right? And I asked for a copy of it, and they sent me one. So they did this for their church. Maybe I'll switch off my blur. The background's a bit messy, if you don't mind. All right. And you can see that the way the story flows is a lot different, okay, compared to what you saw just now. Mine uses a very fixed grid format. For 100 pages, I realized that's easier to read. This is only about 40 pages, right? I mean, some people prefer this, some people prefer, you know, the other one. But this one is definitely a lot different style. And the kind of information is very compressed as well. So, you know, how much information you have to convey in how many pages, right? So you choose based on your subject material, and you choose based on who you're presenting it to, your audience. And I think ultimately the idea, your goal as a comic artist is how do you convey something clearly, of course it doesn't bore your readers, right? And interestingly enough, for them to be engaged and to get your message at the end, right? So clarity, you know, if you fail in the clarity part, then you know, you might not even, the people might not even want to read the rest of the comic.
Yes, and speaking about genre, I when I read the graphic novel, I saw it has some scenes with a humoristic touch. You know, some are more dramatic, but some are. Yep. I don't want to throw any spoiler, but some of them have you know, are funny. You know, and I think that's also appealing and helps the story flow. So before going any further, where can people find this graphic novel of John Wesley?
Currently, it's only sold by the Methodist Church in Singapore. So the website, which I think might have been shared with you guys, that's where you can fill in the form and contact them. I think it depends on how much stock they have. So you might want to contact them early. Bernice printed it, but she's not the one selling it, right? Just to follow up on what Jose Carlos said about humor, the humor that is inside my graphic novel on John Wesley is not something I invented myself. It's actually from John Wesley's own journals. So it's important to pace the story properly, you know, so that it doesn't become too expository for too long, and then after that it gets too boring. So that one, you know, you have to get I mean, your as an artist, you have to get a feel of how the story flows as a reader. You have to basically you have to read it from the eyes of a reader who's never read your story before, rather than from an artist who's, oh, I want this vision, you know, and then you don't care about how people are, you know, tasting your food, so to speak, right? So in knowing how to pace your story, you know, when to use different storytelling techniques, full page spreads, or humor, or, you know, dialogue or expository captions, that's part of the writer's skill. So if you want to be a good comic artist, or rather a comic creator, I would say writing is more important than drawing. Right? If you can't communicate a story, no amount of drawing can save it. All right. But as I mentioned before, if you can't draw very well, even if you can only draw stick figures, if your writing is strong, people will still read it.
Yes, definitely. You can have a good story and with really simple drawings, not to say bad drawings, something really simple, and it can work. But you can have a really detailed and produced drawings, but you don't have a good story, well formed, well written, and it's not going to be successful in terms of engaging your readers. So I have some comments here. I think Gustafson from the US says, thank you for explaining comic book editing. And Muthoni Omukango from Kenya, she says, this is very informative. And we have another question from Janet Wilson. She says, and it's not a silly question, Janet, thank you for asking it. Do most comic artists write the stories as well as draw, or sometimes do a writer and artist work together?
Right. Good question. It depends. There are different ways to work on the comic, okay? And for example, there's the two main ways for DC, and Marvel and those syndicates that did like superhero comics, full script, what they call full script. So someone writes the script in full, everything, description, captions, speech balloons, and then the artist draws, all right? But there's the other one they call the Marvel way, all right, which because Stan Lee, he was handling so many titles at the same time, he only had enough time to write the synopsis for the page, and then his very talented artist went and drew it out, and then he filled in the speech balloons, all right? So that's a more collaborative style where somebody writes, somebody draws, but they might do it in one of these two approaches or a mixture of both. But the key is both the writer and the artist need to understand the medium very well. Okay, you don't get an artist who doesn't understand the visual medium and then tries to write for comics. How is the artist going to draw it? And I mean, how is he going to communicate? Because this is in the end the final product is the visual medium. So your writer, whoever it is, must understand the visual medium. If he's a script writer for a movie, he has to understand that his script is going to appear on screen, not in a book, right? So he, whoever is collaborating has to be able to understand the medium well and handle it well, and also has to have some synergy with the artist, and they have to be on the same page. Otherwise, one person say one thing and the other person draw a different thing, and that can be a bit messy, lah.
Yes, definitely. I've done both ways myself. Sometimes I've drawn and written comics. Sometimes I work illustrating other people's scripts, and that depends sometimes on the budget, the time frame, many factors. I personally like to work with other people's scripts sometimes because you can focus on the illustration, but sometimes it's also for me challenging and fun to write the story as well, even though for me it's more difficult to write than to draw. But I've done it both ways, so I hope this answer your questions. And they're also asking about where to find your work. So can you say again how you are on social media so people can follow you and your work? Because I don't know if everybody can see the comment section.
I've set it to the comments. Okay, let me just find the Methodist. Okay. Here's another one. This is the graphic novel.
In the page of the Methodist Church, it's www.methodist.org.sg/graphic novel. That's right.
Okay. So the information behind the scenes if you want. They did an interview as well.
Yeah. Anyway, everybody who registered for this webinar gonna get an email with some of the links that you will find useful. And if you're watching this recording on YouTube, follow MAI's social media, and you can find also more about our webinars. And now that we're talking about comics production, so how do you think we can be creative to make Christian comics affordable and this life-transforming content to be published, to keep being produced?
Yeah, you're talking about the publishing side.
Yes. How can we be creative and encourage the production of Christian comics and life transform?
Quite a big question. Many aspects to it. I think, okay, firstly, let's deal with the life transforming thing, all right? And since it's in the title of this webinar, we can't transform lives. I think we have to be realistic about it. Okay, the only one who can transform lives is God and through His Spirit. And we are but His agents or His channels, all right? So if we want to be His means to transform people's lives, you might ask, how does a pastor transform someone's life? The very fundamental is to be to be walking with God and be obedient to God, right? Because only God can transform, and only God knows how He's going to transform, and He's the one who will set up the conditions, who will provide the words, the power to do so. So if we want to be people who are going to be used by God to transform lives, then number one, we have to be word-filled and spirit-filled people, right? And working close to God. People who know the message of the gospel well and clearly and are able to convey it, communicate it clearly to people, right? So, just to help us keep in mind that transformation is really God's work through us, not our work for God, right? How do we encourage people? So, Jose Carlos is he leads this organization called Comics 35 Next Gen, right? And why is it called Comics 35? It's a reference to Exodus, right? Where at the building of the tabernacle, God gifted artisans like Bezalel to create the furnishings, the fittings for the tabernacle. God gives people particular abilities, talents, skills to fulfill His work. So if you want to produce comic artists, find somebody who's inclined towards that kind of work, who perhaps he may not realize he has that calling in his life, but never mind. If he has the interest, he wants to tell stories, then encouragement and training. But beyond that, all right, doing long form comic stories like what I did for the John Wesley one is very time consuming. Okay, and it's not something that I can do like 2 hours a day kind of thing, right? 2 hours a day. Okay, that won't work. All right, I have to actually sit down the whole afternoon and kind of undisturbed for a few hours at a time to work, which means taking up a full-time job or another side job might be a bit prohibitive to the production of something of this kind of length and quality. Of course, there are people who do web comics in their free time, and there is that avenue. And there are free platforms to do that, or you can pay a small fee. But web comics are kind of page by page kind of thing every once in a while, so you don't have to craft one whole story and then finally print it at one shot. All right. So if you want to support artists who are gifted in this area to produce this kind of content, then you have to make it feasible for them. the Methodist Church was kind enough to pay my asking fee, which was not small, right? And give me the liberty to work on it over the 1.5 to 2 years, right? So the fact that they were willing to pay me that, I mean, basically a living wage or market rate or whatever you call it, allowed me to concentrate on doing this. Of course, I also had my other teaching engagements, which I reduced for that period, but I could only reduce it because they were willing to pay me for that. All right. So I know publishers nowadays are quite squeezed, and especially with all the digital, media, digital books and all coming in, and funds may be a bit tight. So possibly we could consider pooling resources. I mean, resources in this area, okay, I mean, money is one thing, right? But resources in terms of how many comic editors do you have around to do your editing, right? How those kind of resources, would it be better to come together and form a coalition or something rather than trying each to their own, right? People like Jose Carlos might have good contacts and ideas of how to go about doing such a thing.
Yeah, that's something that we can discuss for many hours, and really important. So now that we're talking about comics and the styles and genres and formats, nowadays and from I think a couple of years ago, Japanese comics, what we call manga, have grown in popularity, as well as Korean and Chinese versions or styles, as we may say. So, what do you think that this has become like a global thing, and should we jump in this bandwagon?
Yeah, common question. As an art educator, I always tell my students, please do not go and draw manga, because they haven't even got their fundamentals right. They want to chase a style, all right? You should never chase the style, all right? Style comes from how you handle your tools in storytelling. So you can learn from manga, you can adopt certain influences, which I have in my time, but don't try and be somebody that God didn't create you to be, all right? Manga is popular, but manga is more, a lot of people try and imitate manga by drawing the same style, big eyes, small mouth, and you know what manga looks like. And then they produce something that looks like manga but doesn't feel like manga. Why? Because the Japanese have a particular storytelling style. And this kind of storytelling style is influenced by their culture, and you don't live in that culture, right? So yes, you can adapt how it looks into your culture, but your culture has its own styles, right? I mean, for the John Wesley one, which I did, I chose to adopt a more European style, what some people would describe, all right? My colleague mentioned, yeah, it looks more European. Of course, it's English, it's set in England, right? So it makes sense to, do something. People say it looks like a bit like Tintin because of the small eyes, and fine, I mean, but it doesn't look like manga, which is a bit visual disconnect, right, from something set in, the 18th century England. So I would say, don't try and get on the style bandwagon, because after a while it gets quite tiring and boring, and originality is lacking. There are many ways to draw, and culturally, each culture has its own body of art, over the years, which you can draw from, which other cultures do not share. So especially if you're going to tell stories of that particular culture within your own culture, or even to share your culture with other people in different cultures, why adopt a manga style for that, for an African story, for example? you know, I would rather see more African art for an African story, right? Yeah.
Yes, definitely. And as you said in one of our previous conversations, manga is not only a style, it's a drawing style. It's a storytelling style that needs to be done right in order to be called manga. So yes, as you said, it's not. It's better to have our own style than others. And I think God uh, made us unique, and we have different kind of gifts. And the way that we draw and the way that we write, we can uh, impact other lives with what we like to do and what we are good at. So we have a question from Pascal Gagelli. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. He says, I'm a freelance Christian artist and I'm currently doing illustrations and short comics on my own, but I strongly believe to the benefit and the power of collaborations. I agree with that. Is there a place, a community where artists and authors can connect for collaborating to create something even greater? So would you like to go first and I can compliment on that?
I think Jose Carlos has a community, but before that, okay. There are online communities, Facebook groups, but I would say not all of them are very good. And sad to say that quite a few of them are not good. And I think one problem with Christian artists face is there are a lot of material, well-meaning, well-intentioned, but way too amateurish, and there's nobody to guide these people to be better. I don't know whether the artists want to be guided to be better, or sometimes artists can be too precious about their own work. I had a student once, I was teaching drawing, and she told me, but I spent 2 years developing my style. I'm like, yeah, but you have like 40 years ahead of you, man. You know, you don't want to be drawing like this, down the road. Yeah. But so having the eye to discern good content is one thing, and being able to say nicely, okay, this needs improvement. All right. How to find good communities? Frankly, I don't move around too much in those circles to know, because I really haven't found any community of Christian artists who are good. Because community of cartoonists, I do know a few, even in Singapore, but they don't produce Christian work, right? So Christian cartoonists are kind of a bit of a rarity in my eyes. But not to say that there aren't good ones out there, and I know a few of them. Ex-Disney artists. In fact, the lead animator for the Beast in Beauty and the Beast, Glenn Keane, he's a believer, and his transformation of the Beast was based on the verse, if a man is in Christ, he's a new creation, right? So there are these people around, but it's not like they're all banding together in a community of sorts, that I'm aware of. So if Jose Carlos can share with us where to find these people, and yeah.
Yes, well, thank you for the question, Pascal. I myself, I believe in the power of doing short comics, and in my experience, collaboration has been also in how to publish these comics. For example, in magazines that that have Christian content, and then having a section of a short comic. I've done one page to 7 pages comics inserted in magazines. And about communities, well, you can follow Comics 35 Next Gen. We are in many social media, and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We have a small channel on YouTube. We just have a couple of animations there, and we are also on LinkedIn. So, and our mission is also to connect creators with illustrators and keep inspiring others to and teaching to produce comics, and we produce Christian comics as well. So you are all welcome to follow us on social media. And also I follow Christian Comics Arts Society on Facebook. And that's a community that have many artists from around the world, and they also have webinars and live sessions, sometimes discussing comics from a Christian perspective. So I hope that answers your question. So before wrapping up, Fabian, do you have some other words to our audience, encouraging words and comments?
Before that, are there any questions wants to ask?
Yes, if you have questions that can be answered live, please write them in the comments section or at the Q&A. And we can answer them here. And
okay, maybe I can also share a few. I did take out a few of my graphic novels and a few instruction books, which I'll give the titles of the instruction books to Ramon to send to you guys, but I can just maybe show you a few books. All right. So if you want to know how to do comics, then expose yourself to comics, you know. I mean, I'm sure most of you publishers read a lot. Read good comics. My John Wesley, okay. I took the aesthetic a bit from this book. Okay, Audubon, all right. It's a historical biopic, fictional retelling of it. And I found this actually when I went to visit my colleague in Melbourne. And it's a story about the naturalist, you know, the Audubon who used to, back in the past, ornithologist, all right. He went to go and collect birds and draw birds, you know, and in the early days of the United States, right? French guy, right? I also like to follow Guy Delisle. So he's got quite a few books like Jerusalem, Travelogues, and he tells story in a quite different style. All right, okay. So Guy Delisle, all right, GOI, okay. And these are more longer form ones. All right. Of course, there's Jeff Smith, Bone. It's a fantasy story compiled in what they call a brick. All right. So some of the panels which I use for actually one page which I use for the death of John Wesley, I actually got the inspiration from here. All right. And if you are familiar with Bone, there's one part where one of the hero dies. All right. So you might find it familiar when you're reading the death of John Wesley in my comic. All right, let me just turn to the page. Okay, this one. All right. Of course, the concept is similar, but the execution is different. Okay. Language of comics. Let me just pull out the other books. So I would say comics is a language, all right? And how do you learn this language? You want to write in English, you want to write essays, you want to write poetry, you learn the grammar and the vocabulary, yeah, right? Some good authors, Scott McCloud, okay? This guy has a few books, but I like this one, Making Comics, one of his later ones. His earliest one is called Understanding Comics. He tells how to make comics using a comic form, all right? So, and he's quite clear. He's pretty good. More old school ones. I don't know if any of you know who is Will Eisner, the so-called father of graphic novels. So he's got a series. He's dead already, but there's a series of his books, graphic storytelling and visual narrative. comics and sequential art. And he uses his own storytelling styles with his examples, right, to, you know, explain how the medium works. So I think rather than, I mean, draftsmanship is easy to learn, all right? Draftsmanship is learning to draw, but how do you compose pictures together, put it together to tell a good story, all right? You might want to also learn how to put your panels together, because each panel, you need to compose it, but all the panels composed together work in a particular way, all right? And they assist the flow, or they can disrupt the flow of your story. Okay, this book is actually a film book. Okay, so I teach storyboarding as well. Storyboarding is not exactly similar with comics, but they share some aspects. So this is quite a classic book on cinematography, camera composition, and that kind of thing, and how do you use it to tell stories. And there are a couple more books. I'll just show you one of these two series. I bought it long ago, but I haven't used it actually. All right, so I just bought the second one. And it's actually a course in how to create comics, all right? So I think the title is very descriptive. Okay, how do you draw with words and write with pictures, right? Okay, so maybe these are some things you can actually try and find in your library or on, your bookshop or Amazon or something, and see what you can get. I'll share a few more titles in the email later on.
Yes, actually, I have most of those titles in my bookshelf as well. I learned how to do comics with reading Scott McCloud and Will Eisner's books on storytelling, because I was looking for classes a couple of years ago, more than a decade ago, and that's what I found. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you, Fabian, for your time and sharing your experience and work. And thank you all for being here with us. So we're glad to have shared this time with you, and God bless you. So follow Media Associates International, MAI, and social media to be updated about our upcoming webinars. And thank you for your questions as well. God bless you, and see you soon. Goodbye.